Willie Brown broke up a family just to get her
Dear
job.
God.
She got 4.5
That's
million
always
votes to get
ridiculous.
into AG and DA and slept with 0 of them.
You don't know
How
that,
do you feel
though.
about
Do you
Donald
know that? No.
Okay,
Absolutely
so
not.
you think that she slept with 4.5 million people to get in her
she
position
could've,
of power?
But the one
Wait,
person that
are
she
you
did
serious?
was the most important person.
Did you just say that she had to sleep with 4.5 million?
No.
My name is Dean Withers. I'm a 19-year-old liberal. I do political debate for a living, and today I'm surrounded by 20 Trump supporters. My first claim is Donald Trump is a racist.
This first claim comes out hot. Donald Trump is a racist. That's first of all, that's a hard claim to prove. You can look towards the what was it? His renting to back in the 70s. He didn't rent to black people. He had the Central Park 5 incident where he called for their execution and stuff. But then you have to look at the evidence that was brought in that, and Trump was never found guilty of that, which they say is because of his crooked lawyer. But like there was not enough evidence to get him as guilty because while the people said it came from the top, it would have been hard to prove that regardless. Also, and it was marked with a C for colored. Their renting paperwork or whatever was like anyone that was black was marked with a C for colored. It's just a hard claim to prove because you can make the case that he had the HBCUs, which were historically black colleges and universities. He funded HBCUs. He had opportunity zones that created 1.5 million jobs for people. He had the biggest criminal justice reform in the past decade, which was the First Step Act. And that you could say that primarily helped the black community because it kept nonviolent offenders from going from prison. So that's just a hard claim to back up in general.
Yeah, so I don't understand how people get this idea that Trump is racist. You know, my family came from a communist country. They came from Cuba, and they came from Mexico. So I don't see any...
A better claim would have been that Donald Trump causes division through race and populism. I don't know.
Anything or any statement that
something,
he's ever
something
made
more
that's racist. I mean, there's
accusations,
accusations, but there's no
able to be
facts behind
factually
it.
backed.
And this whole idea that all Hispanics are illegal immigrants and they came here undocumented is not true because my family came here on both sides through the legal immigration process, not illegally here.
Okay, so that was a bold claim. You just said that, there's no facts to substantiate the idea that Donald Trump is going to be a racist. So in the 1970s, there's civil litigation held against him by the DOJ of the state of New York for literally not renting to black people. What they did is they'd send in quote-unquote testers to his rental properties at the time. They'd send in a white person. The white person would ask the property manager if they had any available properties to rent. They'd say, yes, here we go, here's housing application. Then they'd send in a black tester that asked the same question, and then they'd actually be denied. When this was investigated by the DOJ, the property manager told them.
He's bringing up the same thing that I just brought up, the case from the 70s, which was there was not enough evidence to uphold it. And also that even if he was racist in the 70s, then you would have to change the prompt that Donald Trump was a racist if you want to play linguistics with it or semantics or whatever. It's like I said, it's just hard to back up in the case of past and present or future, like it's just hard to.
It was just a quote-unquote.
It's hard to back up, especially in the place of
and
present.
Then they investigated Donald Trump, brought civil litigation
might be
against
able to
him.
make the case that he was racist because of the Central Park 5 as well. He called for their immediate executions. But then you can just make the argument, well, he just knew what everyone else knew at the time. He just knew what everyone was reporting at the time. It's just hard to back up that claim.
And they essentially determined that, he wasn't renting to black people, in which he then had to promise the DOJ that he was no longer going to racially profile in his housing application, and even had to put ads in the New York newspaper
So basically,
saying that he'd rent to black people.
So what you're saying is basically he's not renting to black people, but yet he employs a lot of minorities. He employs a lot of blacks, Asians, Hispanic.
Okay, to be fair, that's like saying, yeah, but I have a black friend, come on.
Onto his staff. So why wouldn't he be renting to black people. That doesn't make any sense. Also,
because
it seems
it's
to
an
me
example of racism.
but also is an example that the Department of Justice is weaponized against people that do something in life.
Can you give me any evidence for that?
I'll give you evidence of that. Yes, I will, because Trump was political for a very long time. He made political statements. He was very unpopular with a lot of Democrats. He would say things that they didn't like, and they would go after him. He weaponize the Department of Justice.
Wait, but that's
just like they are
Wasn't
right
Trump
now.
a Democrat for most of his life, though?
Oh, they're weaponizing the Department of Justice against him. They're using the government for their political power to go against him because they disagree with his political opinion. That's what they do. The Democrats have been going after him for years. Even
It's hard to defend Trump's morality and ethics and integrity when it comes to shit like this. Like, that's one argument, because when you're just looking at the cases, the 34 felonies, the E. Jean Carroll case, it's hard to make a case, even if you're claiming it's lawfare. How can you prove it's lawfare? Similar to how can you prove it's not? You have to go based on the evidence in front of you. You can't just say, oh, well, it could be lawfare. Yeah, but it also couldn't be. Like, it's all skeptical. So you have to some extent, trust third parties. You know, like, he's saying that the DOJ is going after him as a political opponent. You can't really make that claim, because you have to trust those third parties to some extent. Otherwise, everything is just a conspiracy, you know, like.
been considering he used to be a registered Democrat.
There's a line where skepticism goes too far, is what I'm trying to say.
I don't believe that Trump is racist whatsoever. I don't see that, because I see his employees. I've been to a lot of his properties in the past, and I know that he hires a lot of minorities. So I don't believe that to be true.
Okay, so your claim here is that, well, he actually didn't do what the DOJ accused him and held him liable for doing.
Yeah, but the DOJ says a lot of things that doesn't make it true.
Mind if I finish real quick? So you're saying that the DOJ actually was unfairly persecuting Donald Trump, a political opponent. In the 70s, he wasn't running for any public office, so I don't know why you'd say that was a political opponent. But maybe we could look at a more intuitive example.
Well, he's made political statements in the 70s as well.
Okay,
so,
yeah, okay. So your claim is that, yeah, the DOJ was unfairly persecuting him. Do you have any evidence of that?
If you go back, do you have any evidence why the DOJ was investigating him in the first place?
Yeah, because they had gotten...
No, there's no evidence.
Yeah,
I mean, the DOJ has been an illegitimate
Okay.
organization for a very long time.
Okay.
So they make a lot of statements, but it doesn't mean that they're gonna that they actually go through with anything. Nothing really happened at the end of the day. It was just a witch hunt at the end of the day.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think you'd have any...
I mean, there could be evidence to make the case for lawfare. Again, it's hard to make the case. That's why, like I said, you have to trust what you're given. I think Dean's got the upper hand here when you're making the case of lawfare. The only evidence you can point towards lawfare is that the pattern of the accusations, when they occurred, the court rulings, the minimal evidence. But still, it's not. When you go to civil court, he was held civilly, what was it? He was held civilly liable in the case of E. Jean Carroll, and the thing is, that's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not 100%. When you're in civil court, I think it just has to be half of them. Like, I think it's 50%. I'd have to look. I don't know. It's like 50% of the jurors have to think there's enough evidence, so it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's arguments to be made about the pattern of accusations, the court rulings, the judicial process, the timing, you know, but it's not as strong as the case where you literally have jurors looking at the evidence and saying, yes, he's not guilty, but civilly liable. So, you know, like, Dean definitely has the upper hand in this debate.
I think that at the end of the day, this is a conspiracy theory. I think that Donald Trump
Conspiracy theory.
Mind if I finish real quick?
It is a conspiracy
So
theory.
I think that at the end of the day, this is going to be a conspiracy theory. I think that the DOJ does this. That Donald Trump would perpetuate a lot of conspiracy theories. He did this with the outcome of the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm.
But let's look at another example that's not coming from like the DOJ or
Yeah, the 2020 election was a train wreck, dude. Like, in my opinion, I don't know if Trump should have been allowed to run again after that. Like, where he tried to pull, especially where he tried to get, Jeffrey Clark. He tried to appoint Jeffrey Clark, a underqualified attorney general. He tried to appoint him attorney general, because Jeffrey Clark would have looked for more false electors or looked for more evidence of fraud in the election. And a lot of the senior DOJ officials said that if Trump appointed Jeffrey Clark, that he would step down. Like, you can make the argument that everything Trump did, filed lawsuits, law proceedings, everything Trump did fell under free speech. You can make that argument, but the case of him trying to appoint Jeffrey Clark is just a bad look in general. The only argument you can make for it is that it fell under his rhetoric fell under free speech, and he countersued and tried to do everything within a legal framework. He didn't organize the January 6th insurrection. So that's the only arguments you have against it. But either way, when he should have conceded immediately, and I don't even know if he should be allowed. He shouldn't have been allowed to run. Probably should. An example I always go to from the past is, and this again falls under welfare and affirmative action, and starkly why I think it is not a good thing. I mean, obviously food stamps are good and stuff like that, but like when it comes to like welfare, you can look at Lyndon B. Johnson, historically racist dude, you know, and he said, I will keep them inwards voting Democrat for the next so many years, 60 years or something like that. And he created what's called the Great Societies Act, which was giving $30 trillion to welfare programs, particularly for the black community. And over time, you can look at, I think it was in the 60s, the single motherhood rate for the black community was only at 25%. Only 25% of black mothers were single mothers. Over time, that is now up to 75%, and it's directly correlated with the Great Society programs. Like, and now we're seeing that overreach within reach into Latino communities, white communities. The same thing's happening there because it does not. There's no incentive, first of all, to get married, and second of all, it incentivizes you to marry the government. There's a middle ground that has to be met there where, like, for example, an example I always get, like, I do believe that progressive taxation is a good thing, but then again, you don't want it at like 70% or 60% because then the rich are just going to leave the country, you know? So I think, like, the big thing we'll touch more on economics later, but I just want to stay in because I'm sure they'll have a prompt over that. The fact is that giving too much welfare de-incentivizes people, and on top of that, the black communities were already held down and by systemic racism during that time. So it's just, there's direct correlations to be made from that, and then why the welfare systems came along anyway was due to racism. So it's almost like you get stuck in this repeating wheel of causation, you know. It's
Senator
crazy.
Pushed to get African Americans incarcerated at a higher rate. Like, actions speak louder than words at the end of the day. And what Trump did in office helped the black community at an exponential amount compared to all the other administrations on the Democratic Party.
Okay, so you're saying what he did in office helped African Americans more than other administrations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You referenced historically black universities. Mm-hmm. Do you know how much funding he sent to HBCUs?
A decent amount. I can't give you the exact
So the
number.
exact amount was $250 million per year.
Okay.
Do you know how much Obama's administration and Biden's administration have sent?
Let's see.
I would like to hear.
Trump signed the Future Act in 2019, making $255 million in annual funding for HBCUs permanent. But that's just one part of a diverse stream of assets that includes grants, contracting awards, and debt relief. In total, the federal government provided HBCUs with at least $1.8 billion a year from 2016 to 2018. I love these fact checks they do because they're like nonpartisan fact checks. During the Obama administration, the federal government provided as much as $2.4 billion in a year to help with recovery from the Great Recession. Okay. But Trump made it permanent. So that's and he totaled about 1.8 billion. Still less than the Obama administration, but that was to help with recovery from a
I
great
sent
recession.
$1
So you
billion
got
a
to take
year.
both those into account, you know.
And Biden sent $4 billion a year.
I
So not
personally
only
liked
did he
Obama.
decrease funding to historically black universities, all right, but also you referenced the First Step Act there. How did Donald Trump influence the First Step Act to get passed?
Through Congress.
Well, how did he influence that bill through Congress?
Answer that question for me.
Because he didn't influence it. In fact, it was proposed to Congress under Obama's administration, and it was shot down. Then something else I did want to
But at the end of
Multiple federal justice reform bills have been signed into the law over the last 20 years. In 2004, President Bush signed the Prisoner Reentry Initiative. In 2008, Bush signed the Second Chance Act. In 2010, President Obama signed the Fair Sentence Act. President Trump signed the First Step Act in 2018. Okay. So the difference in those bills was the specific provisions and the impact of the First Step Act. It not only signaled a huge shift in bipartisan support for these kind of reforms. The main thing with it, the main difference in it was that the systemic change that it brought about, not just the
as
reform
president,
itself.
he has the ability to sign or send a bill back to Congress, and he signed it. If he was truly racist, he would not have signed it in the first place.
Okay, but
At the end of the day, he still signed it. And he has that ability. Just like every president before, if they don't like a bill, they have the ability to send it right back to Congress, and there's congressional means to get it passed without the president's approval. But still, he signed it. If he's really a racist, why did he sign it in the first place?
yeah, well, I don't think that we could just ignore Trump saying that Obama isn't a U.S.-born citizen and he's probably from Kenya, right? I don't think that we could ignore.
But
like,
here's the
do you mind if I
thing,
finish here, sir?
Okay, go ahead.
I don't think that we could ignore the civil litigation against him in the 1970s for not renting to black people. I don't think we could ignore his recent comments about Kamala Harris saying that she turned black, implying that she wasn't black prior, just because he signed the First Step Act into law.
That's
like, I
fair.
understand that does do something for the African American community, but I don't think we could say
But I
because he
think
did
that's
this
a
one
reach
thing.
saying that he's racist, saying that Kamala says that obviously Kamala has always been black, always identified as black, but I don't think that makes him racist for
that
saying
all-
that. I do think it's a bad thing to say.
But these other
but
examples are
no
null
one
and
can
void. You also
defend
referenced
Trump's
Joe
rhetoric.
Biden there. I have no problem saying that Joe Biden has a racist past. And in fact, I think that's something I need to recognize and we should all recognize. But what I can't stand is when I hear people denying Trump's racism, saying it never occurred when it's so obvious.
But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to explain right now is that
Dean makes a good point. I do hear people on the right try to just brush off the Central Park 5 incident, the renting to black, renting apartments to black people. Like, it was just, it was, you have to acknowledge that it was a bad thing to do at the time. And that's why I said a better prompt would be, was a racist, or Donald Trump uses race to cause division and promote his populist agenda or something like that.
Biden has signed bills into law, voted for them, that hurt the community.
I think it's hard to
Trump
make the
has
claim that
not
he's
done
still a
anything
racist.
to that extent.
Because his policies do show
Sure, he says some
differently.
things were maybe a little bit iffy. Way back, you're citing things.
I can't stand when people argue against the First Step Act because it was a good bill, and then they'll say that Agenda 47 completely contradicts that. No, those can definitely be compatible agendas. Agenda 47 emphasizes the importance of public safety rather than reforming the criminal justice system against nonviolent offenders. Agenda 47 promotes to give more people stuff, which I don't necessarily agree with. Agenda 47 proposes increased funding for law enforcement agencies, which could be, let's see, so it's funding for law enforcement agencies. Resources could be directed not only towards traditional policing, but also towards community-based programs that facilitate rehabilitation for offenders before they enter the criminal justice system. So on the other hand, you can align the two by saying that the First Step Act and Agenda 47 have different metrics for, they have totally different metrics for success. Recidivism rates from rehabilitation programs initiated under the First Step Act would provide a comprehensive understanding of what works in crime reduction. So yeah, they could work together. I don't think they're completely antithetical to each other. To give funding and more resources to people to help against violent offenders is much different than what the First Step Act did, because you got to view them through two different lenses. And you got to acknowledge that effective law enforcement has to be paired with rehabilitative measures.
Back in the 1970s, that did not even have like that. He couldn't even like sign a law or anything like that because he wasn't even in office.
Okay. I guess where I want to start with is looking at the actual word racist. I think nowadays it's a word that people throw around kind of like the word love. It is a very powerful word. It has a lot of negative connotations.
Hold on, chat. Hold on. I'm going to grab a Red Bull real quick. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back, chat. Sorry about that. All right.
It has a lot of power that comes with it. When I think of racist, I think of Hitler, who murdered millions of Jews. When I think of racist, I think of the Ottoman Turks that
Yeah, but that's a reach. That's a like, not every racist is going to be equivalent to Hitler. Like, come on now. That's insane. In Kentucky, I know that obviously we're like, oh, he's not even American. He wasn't born in America, blah, blah, blah. Let's see the birth certificate. It was a bunch of loaded shit, bro.
I think that looking at Barack Obama, saying that he was born in Africa and then even denying his birth certificate from Hawaii, still like attributing his birth to Africa, I don't really see any other explanation apart from that, besides the fact that Barack Obama has black skin. And then another example from like...
There was a lot of proponents pushing that, though. I think it was more to do with political focus. It had political focus more than a race focus behind it. He was using it to sway people politically, you know.
a comment. That wasn't a racist action. That was a comment. He's
okay.
What action has he taken part in the last 5-10 years that have been racist against not even just blacks, against other races?
All right. First, I don't think that we should call like African Americans like blacks. I think that's a dehumanizing word. But
okay.
Second
That's
of all,
your opinion, but
okay. Sorry. Second of
I've
all,
heard Dean say that before in debates. Is that dehumanizing to say blacks or black people? I've heard him say he prefers black people, but is that dehumanizing? I don't know.
Right. Even if we look
I've
at like the
never heard
last
of that
month
being
or two, I'd say that saying Kamala Harris, right, quote unquote, turned black, implying that she wasn't black prior. That's another racist comment. We could also reference that as
because
debate.
She plays with that. One day she's Indian,
Lots.
one day she's black.
That's not true.
I don't feel dehumanized.
Hello.
Howdy.
Very nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you as well.
So, you're looking back at Donald Trump's history. One thing I do want to say, I don't know if you are aware, Palm Beach didn't used to let African Americans there. Donald Trump sued the city of Palm Beach to allow black membership at Mar-a-Lago.
Trump was one of the first club owners in Palm Beach to open to Jews and blacks, but he did not need to, see, they said blacks, come on now, but he did not need to go to court. Good fact check. She said he had to sue.
That is not racist. I think one of the problems that we have
I just don't
a
think
lot
Trump's
on
a
the
racist
left,
person.
every time there's a disagreement, we get thrown, you're a racist,
There's
you're a
lot of ways to
sexist,
attack
you're
Trump,
this, you're that.
but
And
racism
it
isn't
dissolves
one.
the discussion.
Like, use the case of E. Jean Carroll that they actually have evidence for. Use the 34 felony counts. But, I mean, they obviously are going to point towards lawfare using what I said earlier, saying that, oh, it's, look at the timing, look at the pattern, look at, there's always some excuse for them. But, like, you have to acknowledge that Trump doesn't have the best ethics in the world. That can be dated back to the 70s and his drive to always win. Look at the false slate of electors. He does not have great ethics, especially when it comes to losing with integrity. Like, come on.
That we should be having on
There's
policies.
a lot of ways to attack the ethics
Secondly,
and integrity side. but
Donald
not-
Trump worked with
I think
Senator Scott.
Economically, it's hard to attack Trump. You get the only argument that I've heard from the left is that the trickle down economics creates income inequality. But even to go against that, I'd rather have inequality with progress than equality with stagnation. So it's just, I don't know.
Create opportunity zones in black communities. If he
Created
was truly a
1.5 million jobs
racist,
with those
it's not
opportunity
something
zones. I
that
know
he would
that.
do. So I think the whole premise is he's a racist, he's a sexist, takes away from policy positions that we should be discussing. If we go to the border, And we talk about rapists and murderers. Yeah, they are happening. Laken Riley is now dead. We have 300,000 missing migrant children known sold into the sex trade, per the last IG report. These are important issues. Our economy is important.
An Inspector General report found that from 2019 to 2023, ICE had issued notices to appear in court to 291,000 unaccompanied migrant children, UCs, and 32,000 children failed to appear. Based on the IG's findings, UCs who did not appear in immigration court are considered to be more at risk for trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor. I like that fact check too, because that's the 300,000 thing is thrown around a lot on the right side. It's simply not true. There's not 300,000 missing children. It's more of a paperwork issue in that case. 32,000 would be a more accurate number to represent that. So what the 291,000 unaccompanied migrant children is, the 300,000 is these people. So when they cross and claim asylum, they're given papers to appear in court. They claim asylum, they're led into the U.S., and then that's why a lot of the right pushed for the Remain in Mexico policy, because it kept those asylum seekers in Mexico. That way they had to appear for court. Not all these are necessarily, they're higher, not all these 32,000 children are at risk for traffic, or not all are being trafficked, but they're at a higher risk for it. And this 291,000 was just how many notices were issued, not the amount of actual children missing.
Issues.
The 32,000 failed to appear, but that was just how many that was issued, the issued notice.
Ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Are you a U.S.-born citizen?
100%.
You're statistically speaking 4 times more likely to commit a violent crime than an undocumented migrant.
U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes, according to a peer-reviewed article published in the Proceedings of the National Academy.
So when you kind
They
of
shouldn't
virtue
be
signal
here.
on behalf of that.
They shouldn't be here.
Okay. All right.
And my husband's an immigrant.
Okay, yeah, but
A
also...
legal immigrant.
Okay.
He thought she said illegal immigrant. She said a legal immigrant. Oh my God.
Who came
His
here?
face.
But
A
also...
legal immigrant.
Okay.
Who came here legally.
Okay, I understand.
We've got 100 ISIS in our country right now that was reported.
Shit.
We've got gotaways. We've got Tende Jaragua. I've interviewed Oscar Blue, who's been through the Darien Gap 4 times. People are dying.
Okay, so you're saying that we have a crisis at the southern border.
Well,
We do have a crisis at the southern border. It's more of an asylum issue than it is a illegal immigration issue. Although having illegal immigration stopped is also a key part to control it. The main part is the asylum issue. People get asylum, then they don't show up for court. It's not a great system.
I'm saying
And then
that
they turn into illegal immigrants at that point.
you're saying that
Yeah.
Donald Trump is racist. Donald Trump loves America.
Okay.
We need a
well,
quicker way to get through the asylum process. That's the main issue.
First of all,
And
I
he
want
puts Americans first.
to ask you one simple question
And I
first, and
think
maybe
I think I read this. I think I read this in a different debate. But 24,000 pounds of fentanyl came in under the Biden administration in 1 year across the southern border, and across 3 years of Trump's, I think it was like 4,000. Which you can. It was like 4,000 pounds versus 24,000 pounds, and I don't know if that's the exact number. And that was over 3 years under Trump, and 1 year under Biden, 24,000 came in. So obviously it was an issue, but you also have to look at Trump had Title 42 in account for COVID in that last year, but the first 3 years, obviously they were a lot stricter on immigration. You know,
we could get back to the prompt. Do you think that we have a crisis at the southern border today?
100%.
So you'd say that we also had a crisis at the southern border at the end of Trump's term because we have the same amount of
Actually,
daily
we had the
crossings today than then?
No, we do not have
Yes,
the
we
same
have
amount of-
about...
during the last 4 months of the Trump administration, there were on average 2,470 illegal crossings at the southern border per day. During the Biden administration, there has been an average of 6,170 illegal crossings.
2,400 crossings
that is
today
not true.
than as we
That
had
is
at the
not
end
true.
of
We
Trump's
have
term
up to
after Biden's executive
14,000
order.
14,000 crossings a day. The Biden-Harris administration put us back into what's called the Global Compact of Migration. They are now using an app where they use our refugee resettlement program to fly people into our country to different states. So for you to say that the Trump administration that did not have catch and release, that is not, and Biden put it back in. And then we also had remain in Mexico, which on day one of Biden's administration, he wiped out.
Because it was in a
I don't think remain in Mexico was ineffective. I think the problem was with remain in Mexico was more of a humanitarian issue, because those cities in the north of northern Mexico are very dangerous cities. And if those people from Mexico are fleeing from Mexico and you leave them in a northern city, they're at high risk. You know, when they're waiting on asylum and have to wait in a northern city in Mexico, they're at much higher risk. So it's more of a humanitarian issue than it not being effective. Plus, Mexico didn't really like the bill anyway, but...
effective. I mean, we can
Oh,
look
it
at...
was very
Do
effective.
you mind if I talk real quick?
It's just propaganda. It's what you've heard from CNN and MSNBC.
Actually, how about I provide you a source that isn't CNN, isn't MSNBC, and it's actually a source from Donald Trump's rally. So remember when Donald Trump got shot in his ear? What did he have behind him?
It was the chart that showed the lowest crossings in history.
Do you mind if I talk about that chart?
I
So
have the chart. Should we bring it out?
You have the chart with you?
Yeah, I do.
Bring the chart out.
Can you hand me my purse, someone?
Like you have like an actual picture of the chart?
I do.
Phenomenal. Let's look at the chart. She is prepared. This is great. Oh, it's on your phone. I thought that you had like an
Well,
actual.
it's a picture. We can hold it up to the camera if they want to see it.
Okay, well, I mean, well, maybe we could just reference the data on that chart. So you're referencing the Remain in Mexico policy. So that was one of Donald Trump's day ones. He only had increasing border numbers until the day he signed Title 42 into effect. Year by year,
That's
they
what I
only
just brought up. Title 42 was the main driving factor of really low immigration. During the last... What year did he sign it in? What is it?
increasing border numbers until the day he signed Title 42 into
executive
effect.
order.
Year by year, they only increase.
Is
The
that
Remain
why
in
border-
Mexico
is-
policy, the wall, it was all incredibly ineffective border legislation. He couldn't get Congress together to pass anything, so then he had to reappropriate
That's
DOD
not
funds
true.
to build the wall.
That's not true. Congress.
Okay, that's not necessarily true. First of all, there was a lot of executive orders that Trump did do regarding the border, and Biden actually reversed a lot of those executive orders. One being Title 42, but that had to be ended anyway because of COVID, you know. But there was a lot of executive orders that didn't. And also there was a very strict immigration bill back in May 2022 or 2023 that predated the bipartisan border bill that Trump shot down. It was called H.R. 2, and H.R. 2 gave funding to more judges than the bipartisan border bill. It resumed funding of the wall. It was a very strict immigration bill. It reenacted the Remain in Mexico policy. There was a lot going on in H.R. 2. It was very unlikely to pass because of how strict it was the problem. I feel like that was the main problem with H.R. 2, that you couldn't get both sides on board. But, I mean, there was a lot of executive orders. The zero tolerance policy, the DACA arrivals, the the Title 42, TPS. Biden reversed all these. The H-1B visa changes, asylum transit bans, the national vetting process. There was like a lot of executive orders that Biden did reverse, and that's why I don't like when the left plays this game like Kamala and Biden had no control over what was happening in the border, because they definitely did. And Kamala, particularly, as borders are, I know her main focus was to figure out why they were crossing from South Africa, but a border czar needs to be on top of these things, and more so Biden, but Kamala too. You can't say that, okay, Trump shot down Langford's bipartisan border bill using his influence over the Republican Party while he holds no office. He used his influence to shoot down this bipartisan border bill, saying it was too lenient. While I think that was a mistake, I think he should have let it pass because no immigration is better than none. It was a weak bill allowing 5,000. It allowed four or 5,000 crossings, not crossings, but encounters a day before it shut down the border, and we're likely not even going to hit that average ever, so it probably never would have got shut down anyway. But if Kamala can use her influence, or if Trump can use his influence and doesn't hold a political office, why didn't Kamala use her influence? Because H.R. 2 actually passed the House and it was going to go through the Senate, but it never it got stuck on Chuck Schumer's desk, a Democratic senator. Meanwhile, Langford's bill, which came after that, got shot down in the House. And if Trump can use his influence to shoot down that bill, have Republicans shoot down that bill, why didn't Kamala use her influence as VP to maybe not get H.R. 2 passed, but say, hey, this has some good points in it, let's reconstruct it, let's take this part out of the bill, let's take this part out of the bill, because Langford's bill was introduced with $60 billion in funding to Ukraine. The Republicans didn't like it, so they took that out. They took out that funding to Ukraine, and then they reintroduced it again, and it still got shot down. So if Trump can use his influence with no political office to make that get shot down, why didn't Kamala use her influence as vice president, or Biden use his as president to get H.R. 2, take this out, and then try again? It just don't make sense. And H.R. 2 actually passed the House. So I see the arguments on both sides, because I don't think the bipartisan border bill should have got shot down, but it was a lenient bill. It was a very lenient bill. Of limitation on those. It was the Survivors Act or something like that.
Prosecute him. That they changed.
You have your cases confused. So they didn't change any statute of limitations?
Oh, yes, they did.
That was on the E. Jean Carroll case that they extended it. Dean's right. She's mixed up. They're talking about the 34 felony counts in New York.
1 second.
Oh, yes,
I know what you're
they
referencing.
did.
If you'll just allow me.
Yes, they did.
You'll just allow me.
But
30
not
seconds.
only
Do you mind if I
that-
just have 30 seconds?
Well, we only have 40 seconds left.
I just
so
want to
no,
clarify.
You can't have
They didn't
30
change.
seconds. You've got the seat the whole time.
Okay, we have 35 seconds left. What were his felonies for?
Okay, so let's not talk about that. Let's talk about the plain and simple fact that they moved.
I think they were for forgery of records and stuff. So they'd have to. The prosecutor would have to prove that a false document was created and the intent behind it, the intent to defraud behind it, as well as any provisions made in the
number
context of a
3 from
public record.
Biden's DOJ to a state case. Let's talk about the fact that Mark Pomerantz, who worked in the Biden administration,
could arguably be easy to do. I'm sure
basically
that
pled the
Trump's
fifth
had
6
some
time when
cases
he
of
said
fraud
that he was
throughout
talking
his
to
business
Bragg.
career.
And he would not talk about that. Alvin Bragg ran
He had
on
indictments in
Get-
Georgia. I think
in
Georgia
Trump.
was for the election, though.
Let's talk about Judge Merchant's daughter, Laura, who's making millions for the Harris administration and the Biden administration right now in order to prosecute Trump. That is recusal. It's going to get dropped at the Supreme Court. Alvin Bragg should have recused himself. Judge Merchant should have recused himself.
I like your power. My next claim is Donald Trump doesn't care about the American people.
These are the problem I have with Dean's claims are they're too broad and unprovable. Like if you said Donald Trump cares about himself more than the American people, then there's an argument to be made there. But doesn't care about the American people at all is hard to back that claim
I
up.
completely disagree with you on that. That Trump doesn't. You're saying he doesn't care about the American people. I mean, while he was president, he was pushing pro-economic policies, which were furthering the American economy. I mean, right now, if you go to a gas station, you're paying more money to fill up your car. Going to the grocery store, you're paying more for meat, you're paying more for groceries, you're paying more for a lot of things. Taxes are higher right now. So
Wait,
why
taxes are higher right now? We're still under Donald Trump's tax code.
We're
That's
not
true.
completely. No, it's not true.
There's been
That's
some changes made, though. There's been a lot of changes made to it.
That's not true.
Through
Because
executive
each
orders.
individual state can impose their own taxes.
Federal taxes from the
I'm going to
federal
give you. I'm going to give you an
federal tax
example. In
policy.
Los Angeles County, they passed all these other measures, increasing quarter-cent sales tax.
Okay, this is a ridiculous argument. At the state and local level, Donald Trump or Biden have no control
Here in
over
Los
that.
Angeles County.
I mean,
and
they
what do
could
they do
probably
with the money? They
overreach to
misuse
it,
the
but-
money. They don't even use it to fix the streets. They allocate all this funding towards the homeless, billions of dollars, saying they're going to build all this, all these shelters. They're going to build public housing, and yet all the money goes to administrative costs. It goes into the pension system. So they're misusing the money. They're not using the money to actually help people. So if you think about someone that's going to help people, Democrats have been promising people in the state of California that they're going to do something about the problem. Yet they have unlimited power here to do whatever they want. But yet we have thousands of homeless. The LA Times reported that there was 66,000 more homeless people in the last 7 years. That's the LA Times. That's a liberal magazine quoted. There's 66,000 more homeless people in Los Angeles
Mind
County.
if I ask you a
alone.
question?
Go ahead.
So I've like a lot of reasons I'd like to bring up here why I'd say that Trump doesn't care about the American people, but you reference his economic policy, and we could reference that. So yeah,
Please
can you name
do.
like one economic policy that Donald Trump influenced to get passed that benefited the low and the middle class more than it
Benefited the
benefited
low
the
and-
top one?
Okay, I hate when this question is asked too. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if you look at absolute dollar value, did help the rich more. But the Senate Finance Committee shows that 13.6% people making $50,000 to $100,000, middle class people, saw an average reduction in tax liability by 13.6%. Meanwhile, the people making over $1 million saw a reduction in tax liability from 5.8%. Obviously, 13.6% is higher, so it helped the middle class more if you take in terms like economic utility, meaning the subjective dollar of value. To a millionaire, $500 is nothing. To someone that makes money like me, $500 goes quite a long way. You know, so when you take in the term utility and you look at ratios like percentages, it helped the middle class more. But if you take in absolute dollar value, 5.8% of a million is always, let's do 5.8% of a million is always going to be more than 13% of 50,000. As you can see here, 0.136 times 50,000 equals 6,800, while 5.8%, so that would be 0.058, times 1 million equals 58,000. So obviously, in terms of absolute dollar value, it's going to be more. It's going to benefit the rich more. So that's just a terrible question, and in my opinion, it helped the middle class more. Now, will it create more income inequality? Yes, but that goes back to what I said earlier. Would you rather have income inequality with progress, or equality with a stagnated economy not making any progress? And I've heard the argument that, well, the opportunity cost, if they had, for example, by opportunity cost, I mean the opportunity cost of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, arguably, if you reinvested that in infrastructure or other programs, maybe the opportunity cost nullify the TCJA, and it could have been redistributed through other means. But saying that opportunity cost nullified the benefits of the middle class under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is still that's hard to prove, because if you look at the stats, in the long run, the GDP is supposed to increase by 1.7%, and when you drive up, when the idea behind trickle down economics is that it's reinvested, the rich reinvest, and then you got to ask the question, well, if the rich do not reinvest, for example, if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act does not achieve the purpose of trickle down economics, which is more investment, was it a failure? You could argue that yes, it was, but I think it's inaccurate to say that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act failed entirely to stimulate the economy. Simply because the business investment increased following its passage. The U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA, showed that non-residential fixed investment, which is a proxy for business investment, grew by about 6.4% in 2018. So there's a lot of arguments. I do not like when people say that and on top of that, the First Step Act got nonviolent offenders rehabilitation and out of jail, which also would have helped the middle class more. Opportunity zones arguably help the rich more, but it still helped the middle class. Like, if you look at absolute dollar value, everything's always going to help the rich more. And here's the problem with high taxation. Well, I think progressive taxation is good. Maybe higher the tax on the rich a little bit. When you overreach and say like 60%, like Kamala Harris wanted to do, they're just going to end up leaving the country. We can see this in there's all kinds of examples of this where the rich end up leaving the country. I think Switzerland, Venezuela, Germany, it's happened in many, many countries. So I think it's unfair to say that it helped the rich more, but I'm sure this dude's about to get ate alive. So
1%.
Well, first of all, the Democrats passed all these policies.
Also, you have to keep in mind that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did add $190 billion a year and a $10 billion increase in GDP, but that's also not a good faith claim. I think I heard Parker make this claim one time. And I love Parker. I think I love watching his content. I watch him all the time. But by 2028, there's supposed to be a $600 billion increase to GDP because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that is according to the Tax Foundation. So it's just, you have to look at the incentive structure behind the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is what you got to look at. And while I think, like I said, while I am pro-progressive taxation in both corporate and tax, I think you don't want to overreach that taxation. I think there's an obvious middle ground that needs to be met. You can look at, like I said, a good example of why taxing the rich and welfare programs and redistributing wealth and stuff doesn't work is because it lacks incentive. It's always lacked incentive, always will lack incentive. And then you have to also ask that, well, we'll just hear what he has to say. But Trump had the CARES Act during COVID that did lay the groundwork for inflation. If you want to get off of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and into other things, deregulation also arguably helped small and medium-sized businesses, SMEs, or enterprises, SMEs. But you have to acknowledge that during the CARES Act, many economic analysts say that no president could have handled that differently. So where is your... How was it that Trump, while you have to acknowledge that $2.2 trillion injected into the economy from the CARES Act did definitely lay the groundwork for inflation, I think it's obvious that Biden's policies had a more direct and visible impact on that. Because you can look at the pandemic spending, the monetary policy, and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act under Trump, as well as the CARES Act, which goes under pandemic spending. If economists say that no one could have handled that differently, and then early in Biden's presidency, we see the American Rescue Plan that injected $1.9 trillion for COVID relief, which arguably was needed. But I think it could have been, there should have been better timing of it. Like, the American Rescue Plan wasn't a bad bill, but the timing was bad. We were still under supply chain issues and labor shortages, and then we inject $1.9 trillion into the economy. On top of that, the war in Ukraine, the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. I mean, Larry Summers, which is a former Treasury, said, and this is a quote, the American Rescue Plan was substantially excessive. It was bad timing during those supply chain issues and labor shortages. And so it's obvious that Biden's stimulus spending had a more direct and visible impact on inflation, while Trump most likely laid the groundwork for it, but it couldn't have been done any differently. I don't think if you look at Trump's first 3 years as president, I don't think there's many things you can take from him economically other than income inequality, which again, I'd rather have inequality with progress than equality with stagnation.
Wait, just about Donald Trump. Can you name one policy he influenced to get passed that benefits the low and the middle class more than it benefited the top
I
1%?
hate
Yeah,
that
he
question.
tried to, or during COVID, he tried to keep businesses open. I mean, Democrats were trying to close down all
That's
their
not a
states.
policy,
Can you
dude.
name a
Put
policy?
businesses that they put no. They put a lot of businesses out of business during COVID. During the past years that COVID was in existence, all the states that were liberal, Democrat-run states, have controlled a lot of the process here in the state of California. Like,
Okay.
I'll give you an example.
You didn't answer my. I'm so sorry.
In the state of
You didn't
California,
answer
Gavin Newsom shut down this state. Ron DeSantis did not shut down his state. Yet you have businesses here that were small that went out of business. Yet you have the state of Florida, the majority of businesses stayed in business, did not go out of business. The only businesses that went out of business.
Again, I know I mentioned the First Step Act, but the Bureau of Justice statistics shows that led to a 19% decrease in recidivism. So there's that too. So there's many things this dude could be answering. HBCU funding also helped the middle
that
class.
stayed
A
in
lot
business
of this stuff
were
helped.
corporations like McDonald's, Burger King, and Walmart.
Okay,
so,
sir,
and
with
by
all-
the
with
way,
all due
and by
respect,
the way,
you literally
and by
didn't
the
answer
way,
my question.
The Democrats were benefiting those businesses because they were voting in favor of them.
Okay, with all due respect, you literally didn't answer my question. I asked you to name a policy that Trump influenced to get passed that
But yet
benefited.
you're the one that called me racist earlier, so I'm supposed to answer you.
Jesus
Okay, well, I mean, if
Christ,
you don't
dude.
want to have a productive dialogue with me here, I don't see what your point of even showing up to the episode would be.
Well, productive is not calling someone racist either, right?
I mean, all you have to do is prove that. All you literally have to do is take examples and prove why higher taxation does not benefit the economy more than lowering taxes, and then you can make the argument there. And again, I think there's a middle ground that needs to be met. I don't think you don't want to overtax the rich and then end up leaving like we've seen in other countries. But there has to be a progressive tax system that reaches a happy medium. Trump tax cuts are extended. If extended, those who make $500,000 a year or more would receive the biggest benefit. Obviously, while those making 50. See, this is the economic utility I'm talking about. This is, in my opinion, complete academic dishonesty. Obviously, if the Trump tax cuts are extended, those who make $500,000 a year or more will receive the biggest benefit, even if they get 5.8% tax cuts versus 13.6% like we saw in 2017, 2018. Those making $50,000 would receive the smallest benefit, obviously, because 13.6% of $50,000 is always going to be less than 5.8% of $500,000 or $1 million. Like, it's complete academic dishonesty, and I can pull up my source for that right here. It's right here. The ICYMI, the Senate Finance Committee, as the data notes, Americans with incomes between $50,000 and $100,000 saw their tax liability drop by twice as much as Americans with income above $1 million. Americans with adjusted gross income of $50,000 to $74,000 saw a 13.2% reduction in average tax liabilities between 2017 and 18, while those making $75,000 to $99,000 saw 13.6%, and Americans making over $1 million saw a 5.8%. 5.8% is less than 13.6% if you take in the term economic, and if you take in that term economic utility. If I make $50,000 and take 13.6% of that, that's $6,800 we got. That $6,800 is going to go a long way for me, while $1 million to $50,000 is still a good amount, but that's more for them to reinvest as well. But in terms of economic utility, that $6,000 is more than I would say that $50,000 is to the millionaire. In my opinion. Not opinion, that's a fact. So obviously, in absolute dollar value, it's going to help the rich more always. It's just ridiculous statements like this that piss me off. It's dishonesty.
People making over $400,000 a year, and it costs the American taxpayer $1.9 trillion.
In terms of absolute dollar value, they need to add that in. because just adding this fact check is just
dollars through debt-related spending,
ridiculous.
and it only is going to lead to an average annual GDP increase of 0.02%. Please allow me to finish. Right. So it is the case that no, that didn't that
Wait, what did he say?
$4.9 trillion through debt-related spending, and it only is going to lead to an average annual GDP increase of 0.02%. Please allow.
Wrong. It's going to lead to an increased GDP percent of 1.7% and $600 billion GDP increase. And I have a source for that as well. The National Bureau of Economic Research showed. No, let's see. Where was it? Okay. The Tax Foundation estimated that the TCJA would increase the long-term size of the economy by 1.7%, contributing to $600 billion to GDP by 2028. So that's just false.
Please.
Republicans of the House Budget Committee said the cuts increased the share of taxes paid by the top 1% of households and decreased the burden on lower income households, while wages rose by. However, Republicans on the House Budget Committee said the cuts increased the share of taxes paid by the top 1% of households and decreased the burden on lower income households.
Please allow me to finish. Right. So it is the case that no, that didn't benefit the low and the middle class more so than the top 1%. It only is leading to a greater income inequity.
I don't believe you, and I don't agree with you, and I've seen no data. I've seen no data to support that.
Okay, so that's coming from the.
There's where the truth comes out. He's not concerned about the rich making more. The big concern is income inequality. And let me ask you a question. Say Callie's my neighbor, and she makes $2 billion a fucking year. And I make $50,000. Why do I care that she has more, there's a huge inequality between us. If I can increase mine to, say, $75,000 a year the next year, and she can increase hers to $3 billion, a whole $1 billion, I don't care. I'd rather have inequality with progress. The risk at that is kind of like what we're seeing with Musk when oligarchies form and stuff like that, which is a dangerous precedent. Don't get me wrong, but still, I'd rather have inequality with progress than have the person making $3 billion just up and leave the country and go to Puerto Rico, and then their taxes are going to go to that government, or go to Venezuela or wherever taxes are cheaper at, and then like Jake Paul moving to Puerto Rico for lower taxes. Like, the rich will just leave the country if you raise the taxes too much.
Tax Policy Foundation that's coming from other economic sources that we would find online to be able to distribute how much it costs. Okay. So is it all right if I give you my reasons why I'd say he doesn't care about the American people?
In 10 seconds or less.
Okay. Well, I mean, I feel like in order to have productive dialogue, right, have to be able to distinguish why I believe the things that I say.
Okay.
Why you
and then I'll
disagree.
let you know why I believe the things that I do.
Okay. So the reason I'd say that Donald Trump doesn't care about the American people is because he has incessantly placed himself above the American people.
That's why I said he should change the prompt to Donald Trump cares about himself more than the American people. Because just saying he doesn't care about the American people is kind of easy to discount.
The best examples of this was in 2020 when he denied the outcome of the election, and then he attempted to stage a coup against our government in an attempt to rig the outcome of the 2020 election by sending fake certificates of ascertainment to Congress to be certified as real. That was the greatest internal attack on our government since the Civil War. Another example would be the border. He has consistently placed himself above the American people in that respect. He torpedoed Langford's bill in the Senate that would have specifically brought an end to the crisis 2 years ago.
Okay, you've got
He didn't want to give the Democrats a win.
Let's slow
and then
down.
Another example.
Wait, no. Let's slow down because you just put out so much. And
It sounded like he only put out 2 points. And the first point is almost impossible to negate. The only thing you can claim against the false slate of electors is that at least he tried to do everything through a legal process. He didn't organize the coup. All his rhetoric, peacefully and patriotically, fight, all that shit falls under free speech. That's the only argument you have. But him trying to appoint Jeffrey Clark to continue the investigation for fraud and using a false slate of electors in Georgia and all that, it's hard to defend. Like I said, I don't even think Trump should have been able to run again because of that. But that's a very hard thing to defend. But the argument that's probably going to be used is that he did everything through a court process and legal process, and I mean, you really can't discount that he did do almost everything under a legal process. I think the one problem that he got indicted in Georgia for I'd have to look it up, but he got indicted for Georgia for something to do with the hard part's going to be trying to find false, because there's no charge specifically for false slate of electors. It's like falsifying public documents, it would be. And it's hard to prove that if you can't have hard evidence on it. So it's going to be hard to prove it's going to be easier to prove what he's saying. It's going to be almost impossible for her to discount that. But in the claim of Lankford's bill, like I said, H.R. 2 on Chuck Schumer's desk, which is she's going to bring up again, was a too strict bill. It was way too strict. From a Democrat's perspective, it was way too strict. From a Republican perspective, Lankford's bill was too lenient, allowing 4,000 encounters a day. My question that I would ask Dean is, if Trump can use his influence to shoot down H.R. 2, then why can't Kamala use her influence as a literal holding the office of vice president to change? Because, like I said, when Lankford's bill got shut down the first time, they took out the part about funding Ukraine $60 billion, and then they tried again, and it still got shut down. Why didn't Kamala, and again, Lankford's bill never passed the Senate or House. At least H.R. 2 made it through the House, so why didn't Kamala say, well, let's take out this provision about the Remain in Mexico Act that the Democrats don't like, take out this that the Democrats don't like, and why didn't she use her influence to get that pushed through? You know, like it's contradictory to what they're saying. Oh, he doesn't care about because he torpedoed Lankford's bill, they thought it was too lenient, just like the Democrats have shot H.R. 2 down because it's too strict. It's just, they're contradicting themselves. So if he doesn't care about the American people, but because of that, then I guess the Democrats don't select a slate of potential electors before the general election. They officially become electors only if their party's candidate wins their state's popular vote.
Possible?
When you were like 5.
Is it possible
this has happened all the time?
Okay, yeah. Could you give me another example of a sitting U.S. president not agreeing with the outcome of the 2020 election, then going to the DOJ? Trump told Bill Barr to announce widespread voter fraud when there wasn't any.
They didn't investigate it. They didn't investigate it. Every single case was
there were
every
63
single
court cases
that were dismissed on standing.
Because they didn't have sufficient evidence.
No, because the judges said they never saw the evidence.
Okay, I'm going to go to tell you what happened with the 2020 election. So
okay,
Donald Trump
you're going to tell me what you think happened, but I'm going to tell you that you're wrong.
Okay, one moment, ma'am. Donald Trump formed an election integrity committee where he appointed his people and gave them millions of dollars.
What's happening
you mind
now?
if I finish?
No, I do mind because you know
ma'am,
what?
if you can allow me to finish, we can't have a productive conversation
Well,
here.
we can't have a productive conversations when you have an entire 20 minutes and filibuster the whole thing.
Okay, well, if you want to talk, go ahead, but you're not allowing me the time to demonstrate why I believe in what I do.
Okay, but you're not allowing me to say basic fact of what has happened in this instance.
Okay. There is alternate slates of electors. There have been in past elections. But what Trump did, the main problem that Trump did was alleging that my critique is saying that he tried to coup the government, the coup framing, you know. He had legal maneuvers, such as filing lawsuits to challenge the state-certified results, advocating for alternate slates of electors. So there's not, I don't think there is alternate slate of electors, but I think you can advocate for them. But he did all this legally. They were attempts to leverage an existing legal mechanism rather than seize power unconstitutionally. A coup, by definition, implies an illegal and often forceful overthrow of the government. So you can look at January 6th, but all of Trump's, from a legal standpoint, this is the only argument I could think of, all of Trump's rhetoric surrounding January 6th falls under free speech. Peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. blah, 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 and everything he said in between. Everyone brings up that peacefully and patriotically, but you do have to admit that it was a pretty heated thing. So I think January 6th is indefensible to the people there, and I think they should be in jail. If they went inside, they should be in jail. But it's hard to legally place that on Trump's back. You can try, but it's hard to legally place it on his back. Again, because of everything he tried to do during that and the outcome of what happened, because he does have to take responsibility for it. He has to say he should take accountability and say, I'm sorry that my rhetoric may have caused this, you know. But I don't think he should, from a legal standpoint, I don't think he could be held accountable. But at the same time, I don't think he should have been able to run again, because that was a very dangerous thing that happened, you know. Very bad thing that happened. And if you can't condemn that, you're part of the problem.
Every person that runs for election has the opportunity to challenge an electoral process. That is not illegal. What's happening now is you've got attorneys that were looking into the election fraud, which the Biden DOJ is now prosecuting, having their law licenses removed. We are watching communism in live action. And you know what? I want you to have a future.
Can you define communism?
Yeah, basically.
A stateless and classless society. A lot of people conflate communism with Marxism. Marxism is the idea that the people that own the means of production, the rich. Historically, Marxism is the idea that income inequality is the problem. Basically, that the people that own the means of production, the rich, and the poor will always be at each other's throats, and it will end up badly.
Basically, it's mob rule. It's Marxism. It's mob rule. It's
false.
No,
Literally all wrong.
Marxism and communism are not the same thing.
Communism is a stateless, classless, moneyless society.
Yeah, stateless
Okay.
and classless.
Welcome in. Doing all right.
Trump's administration versus Biden's, objectively 2016 to 2020, and then under Biden so far up to date. Objectively, the economy was better under Trump. Inflation was as high as, I believe, 9% under Biden. It's destroying the middle class, and then it's also putting people in more poverty. So how does that make Trump not be in support of American people? If it's breaking down the middle class, putting people in more poverty.
Yeah.
So things in the grocery store are 4 times higher to pay for. People are having harder time to put food on the table for their families.
Yeah.
During the Biden administration versus Trump. So I want you to
Yeah, of
kinda
course.
explain.
Well, let's start off here. Do you think that the Biden-Harris administration caused inflation?
Yeah, because under Trump's administration and the policies he
Yes,
induced,
definitely. They
inflation
caused
was never that high.
inflation.
Okay.
And then
They
after
were a
so-
part
COVID
of it.
and
They played a
Biden's
role in it.
administration,
Again, like I said, with the CARES Act of Trump's, we saw that he definitely laid the groundwork for inflation, along with supply chain issues and everything going on with COVID, labor shortages, everything was going wrong with COVID. And then, so Trump laid the groundwork for it with the CARES Act, which, again, economic analysts say nobody could have done anything differently. And then we see when Biden gets into office, and Larry Summers said the American Rescue Plan was extremely excessive, and he was a former U.S. Treasury employee or whatever, and he injected more money into it with the American Rescue Plan, along with the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Those totaled to like $4 trillion right there. And injecting that during supply chain issues, yes, he had a more direct impact on the inflation. He did not cause it, but the timing of that was just absolutely awful. It was just absolutely awful.
took over, everything skyrocketed. Gas
Okay.
prices, grocery stores,
So
everything.
your argument here is because it happened in the country while they were president, they caused it. So my question to you is, did Donald Trump cause the
That's not the
highest rate of unemployment that we've had since the Great Depression in August
Obviously, COVID caused that.
of 2020 at 14.8% simply because it happened under his administration?
No, simply because people couldn't leave their home, which was, causing people to
And
be
now we're
fired from
introducing
their
external
jobs.
variables. So in the same way COVID caused, right, that high rate of unemployment that we had under Trump's term, COVID also caused the global inflation that we saw onset.
But
at
you
the
can't
beginning-
attribute all that to COVID. While COVID was the main factor, those three policies, that specifically the American Rescue Plan that Biden piled on top of it right after Trump's CARES Act, was just terrible timing to do that.
Getting to the Biden-Harris
you can't
administration.
You can't place all the blame on the president, but you also can't blame all of it on COVID. There's definitely our president does make a difference in the policies that
this didn't happen locally in the U.S. This inflation happened all around the globe. But a fun fact here, the Biden-Harris administration actually ushered in the quickest response from the inflation onset by the pandemic out of any other country in the G7.
That's true, too. That's true.
I had another point, which was that.
Appreciate you for coming up, man.
And there's also other external factors other than the supply chain issues, labor shortages, American Rescue Plan, CARES Act, the war in Ukraine. There's a lot of stuff.
What I've noticed, because I work in retail for some seasons, and I've seen a huge floodshot of Colombians coming in. Okay, we just got to be really realistic here about the economy. So yes, I think that kind of blaming causation and kind of correlating that to the current president, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. However, I think that when you look at the border and the way that everything has been coming in with migration, of course that the economy became better. Why? Because a lot of Colombians came in, right? And they started working and they started inputting more taxes. All these fake socials that they get, they start contributing to the tax money. They pay more taxes every year, and the government...
Well, this is a poor argument straight out the gate, because if you look at the numbers, technically illegal immigration has a net positive impact on the economy.
It basically hides this by grabbing an app,
but
and
that
they
doesn't
basically
make
use
illegal
that as
immigration all good, obviously.
Bracelet replacement so that people don't
It's kind of the same idea with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Lowering the taxes obviously drives innovation and boosts the economy, but the argument that Democrats make on it is in regards to income inequality. The same thing's kind of like this. Well, even though as a net, the Republicans kind of make the same logic here. Well, even though it has a positive on the overall economic output in the U.S., it's not going to legal citizens. It's not going to the right places. It's not fair. It's unequal.
Out. Instead of putting an ankle bracelet on people's ankles, they hide the fact that they're allowing
the right and the left, the far right and the far left have a lot more in common than
all these illegal immigrants come in. So the economy
if you look at it
has
from an
become
objective
such a
standpoint.
success, per your statement that it's been a success in the last 4 years, because all these immigrants have been contributing to the tax dollars that the government has been wanting. And so hence Medi-Cal.
So you'd agree that immigration is good for the economy?
The immigration issue is they're being paid less money than the average salary. So I don't understand how that's good for the American people. I think that if
one thing I don't understand is why not go after the people that are offering them less money than minimum wage?
You can properly execute someone immigrating into this country legally and doing it rightfully and everything. Like, yes, you can manage the amount of the way the economy is working.
Yeah, I'm definitely.
Where I get caught up is that, like, we saw a more stable more steady GDP under Trump, more wage growth under Trump, more everything in less inflation under Trump, remaining at a steadily at around 1.4% until the COVID pandemic hit. And then, like, there's so many arguments to be made there. The only thing Biden beat him in economically was the job growth, and that was due to the COVID recovery rate. But
definitely a little bit confused on.
There's just so many arguments to make here, and what he just said is crazy.
Shared with me, but we have a.
But I think I see the like I pointed out how their logic is kind of the same in this. And they're saying, well, even though it has a net positive on the economy, it's not going to the right people. It's not going to actual citizens. Blah blah blah.
Problem, and that is undocumented migration. Correct?
Yes.
This is another reason why I say Donald Trump doesn't care about the American people. Because Donald Trump doesn't...
If he cared
you mind if I finish?
Go ahead.
Because Donald Trump doesn't care about the southern border. I have a question for you.
Okay.
If your house was burning down and a fire truck showed up to put the fire out and you told them to turn around because you wanted the insurance money from letting it burn, did you care about your house?
No.
Of course.
No.
I don't think he understood. I don't think he understood the question.
The idea would be, if you let the house burn down to get the insurance money, you wouldn't care about your house. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. right? So when we have a crisis at the southern border and we have the fire truck, or in this case, right, an amazing border bill that would have ended the crisis.
Here would be my counter to that question. Well, if you have a fire truck that's 10 miles away, and then you have one that's 2 miles away, wouldn't you want the one that's 2 miles away to come to your house? Because HR2 was 2 miles away and this was 10 miles away. When VP Harris could have used her influence to make changes to that or push for changes to be made to it, like taking the Remain in Mexico part out, the wall funding out, certain parts of it, and then you still would have got more funding than Langford's bill. So, like, there's just counters to all these arguments that these people aren't presenting. You know,
years ago, proposed to Congress by Langford, a Trump-endorsed Republican.
And again, I disagree with Trump shooting down Langford's bill, but you have to turn around and use the same logic to question why didn't Kamala Harris push for changes to be made to HR2? Why didn't she push for, because HR2 predates that by a long time, and it actually made it through the House, unlike Langford's bill. And Kamala or Biden, either one, could have used their influence to push it further as well. So you got to apply logic to both sides. And this is what I hate about watching these debates online. It seems that the logic only applies when it's in each person's favor. Try to apply it to both sides, and you'll see that it's just...
And then Donald Trump
You'll
turns
figure out
around
what's right. And here's the fact. If from a world perspective, am a economically centered, left-leaning libertarian socially. I don't think the government should be involved. Minimally safety nets economically, like almost no involvement. And I think there's cases where obviously safety nets are needed and helping the poor and stuff. And then I don't think they should be involved in socially either. So in that sense, and from a worldview, I would be kind of a left-leaning libertarian from a worldview. But I'm more centered economically. And then I think the problem here is that if I look at it from being a centrist or nonpartisan does not mean you take this guy's response and Dean's response and say, okay, let's look for something in the middle. To me, being nonpartisan means looking at both arguments objectively and with no bias. Obviously, everyone's going to have a little bit of bias, but I try so hard not to. But look at it with no bias and then pick which one works better. That's what you have to do. And sometimes that does end up in the middle. Sometimes it does end up in the middle. Like in the case of the economy, I think progressive taxation is good, but I also think low taxes do benefit. So you shouldn't tax the rich too much, but you should also maybe hire them just a little bit, you know. So it's just, and especially from a corporate sense, we're currently at a flat 21%. Under, I think, Obama, we were at 35%. I think 21% is good to have that low taxation, but I also think it should be corporate tax, but also I think it should be a progressive tax system corporately, maybe higher it to 25, somewhere in the middle of 35 and 25. So low taxes are good, as well as progressive taxation. I think there is cases where it does fall in the middle, but in most cases, it's looking at what you think is right objectively. Objectively looking at both sides. It's not just picking, oh, I'm in the middle of every argument. No, that's not being nonpartisan. That's not being a centrist. That's not being a centered libertarian, left-leaning in my case, you know.
And calls up the Republicans in the House and the Senate and tells them to vote against the bill because he doesn't want to give the Democrats a win, and he wants the ability to be able to campaign on the crisis at the southern border now. Does Donald Trump care about the southern border?
So basically what you're doing is you're trying to attack and kind of deflate the right? But at the end of the day, we got to realize that no side is potentially perfect, because clearly the Democrats are going to see that the right are horrible, and the right's going to see that the Democrats are also
But do you mind answering that question there? Because I did make an important point there that I don't think should go unnoticed, right? In the same way in the hypothetical, if you let your house burn down and
yeah, see, that's when I would ask the counter question and bring up HR2, because it's
truck
just
to turn away, you don't care about the house.
Again, I think Langford's bill, I think he did the wrong thing shooting it down, but then you got to apply that same logic. Did Harris do the wrong thing by not making changes to HR2 or pushing for or using her influence to push for changes to HR2 and getting it passed? Because again, I would apply that logic and say, well, HR2 is a fire truck that's 2 miles away. because it already passed the House, while Lankford's bipartisan border bill is 10 miles away, you know? So you got to apply the
and if
logic
Donald
to both
Trump
scenarios.
lets the crisis at the southern border continue
'Cause it never
and
passed
tells
the
like the
House.
Republicans in the House and the Senate to turn the border bill around in 2022, he doesn't care about the southern border.
Look, the border's always going to have a crisis. There's human trafficking constantly. If you look at the narcotics, if you look at all these drug dealers that are coming in, right?
Hi, thanks for coming up, man. What's your name?
Jordan.
Jordan, nice to meet you. Dean, we have 3 minutes and 42 seconds left on the clock here. I would like to bring up a huge reason why I'd say that he doesn't care about the American people. Is that all right?
Yeah.
Cool. It's because how much he lies. Donald Trump is an incessant, unapologetic liar. He lied to the American public over 30,000 times while he was president. He told the biggest lie that any sitting president has ever told with the denial of the 2020 election. And what is the Achilles tendon to a democracy? An uninformed voter base. Trump has misled his voter base, has made them misinformed, has made them engage in fringe conspiratorial
I agree that there is a problem with disinformation, but here's the problem with somehow trying to censor that. What do you do? Put a disinformation sticker on anything that's disinformation, and then it becomes one-sided. I think as much as the left hates Elon Musk, I think he did the right thing with Twitter by making it a free speech platform. But again, I think Elon does wrong because he pushes his tweets to more people. He shouldn't be doing that. He should let it be the algorithm naturally do its thing instead of pushing his populism and his beliefs to many people. It's a dangerous precedent to set. So I don't think there's much of a way you can. The only way to do that would be to impede free speech and stop people from posting disinformation. So I think you just have to an extent, depend on the voter base to make a decision.
By his incessant lies.
Okay. Can you give me any reasons why you think Joe Biden cares about American people more than Trump?
Okay, I mean, yeah, sure. First of all, Kamala Harris is running for president right now.
No, Joe Biden.
Joe Biden, sure. Yeah, because Joe Biden...
Just the Democratic...
Of course. Because Joe Biden passed 4 pieces of monumental legislation that benefited the low and middle class more than it benefited the top 1%. We could talk about the PACT Act, investing $800 million into the expansion of the healthcare benefits. We could talk about the Chips and Science Act, bringing 20% of the...
Another claim, the Chips and Science Act, I hear them bring this up a lot, yet they do not want to bring up the fact that, and this is a fact, that Trump laid the groundwork for the Chips and Science Act. His rhetoric around the Chips and Science Act have always been that we need to bring the Chips and Science Act. What it did was bring semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States because we depend on Taiwan and China a lot for that. But and it was signed in under Biden in 2022. But Trump definitely laid the groundwork for that. Specifically, Trump in 2021 called for substantial investment in semiconductor manufacturing because the U.S., especially among the global shortages that were going along then, and depending on Taiwan and China, Trump's always pushed that we're too heavy on China. That's why he wants to tariff the fuck out of them, which... We'll get into blanket tariffs later because those are a horrible idea. Blanket tariffs are a horrible idea. Targeted tariffs are the only way to do it against unfair practices. But the fact of the matter is that discussions on how to boost the productions of semiconductors were definitely pushed under the Trump administration, and he definitely laid the groundwork for it. And it was a bipartisan bill. Both sides pushed for that. So you can't use that to say that Biden cares about the American people, but Trump doesn't, because Trump pushed for the Chips and Science Act as well and publicly expressed support for the initiative.
Global chip reduction back to here at home in America by 2030.
Trump has always had rhetoric pushing for manufacturing to be
talk about the
brought
infrastructure
back to the
bill,
US.
investing $1 trillion into local communities.
The infrastructure bill, another thing that was a great bill, but the money didn't go necessarily where it was needed to go. It didn't go to the right places. Also, the timing of it was questionable as well, along with the American Rescue Plan. Did we really need more money put into infrastructure while we were struggling? All these are good bills. The infrastructure bill is a good bill, but the idea, we were under a supply chain shortage at the time and labor shortages, and pushing all that money into the deficit during the shortages just had as we saw, had a dramatic increase on the inflation.
Communities across the U.S. spurring their economies and creating new construction jobs. Or we could talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, investing millions of dollars into renewable energy resources.
Inflation Reduction Act, also a good act, which should end up actually at possibly a surplus, or a neutral deficit bill anyway. And it's good, but we're not going to see the Inflation Reduction Act take any effect until probably 2030, and that was according to the BEA, if I'm not
Reduce
mistaken.
inflation in the long term by addressing supply chain issues now. Those are 4 big policies that I would say demonstrate Biden's care for the American people.
Okay.
Well, you can turn around and say deregulation for small businesses, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the First Step Act, Opportunity Zones. All these demonstrate Trump's care. Listing these policies means nothing, especially when some of them were pushed by Trump as well. Trump's right.
4 years ago under Trump, did you see
again, this is
benefits
just
going
not a
towards
good point.
immigrants and wars more than American people?
Did we see? No, and we don't see that now either.
Oh, we don't see it now,
No.
bro. I moved here from Chicago.
I mean, another thing with the Chips and Science Act is that it got like 64 votes in the Senate, and then like 243 versus 180 something in the House. So it's like it was supported by everybody.
And 4 years under Trump, I wasn't seeing
Virtually
immigrants
everybody.
sleeping outside of police stations, gathered in gangs, and doing drugs outside police stations, living in high-rise hotels, getting benefits.
Oh, if you're just there's more
getting
immigrants
money,
coming into our country now than
getting
there was
free
in the
money.
term. That's true.
But
And what else did he say? Oh, the PACT Act I was talking about earlier. While the PACT Act did aim at addressing veterans' health issues, I think it was specifically for toxic substances, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look it up. But the implementation was not good around it. So you can recognize the intentions of something while also had great intentions. All of those were on paper great acts, especially the infrastructure bill. I liked it, and I liked the American Rescue Plan was good too, but again, the timing was terrible. Some say it was necessary. I disagree. I think it was necessary, but it was too it was too much. It was way too much, excessive. But anyway, yeah, the PACT Act, the actual delivery and effectiveness was the problem with the PACT Act. The benefits often fell short. People had problems getting signed up. It had its problems, you know. It definitely had its problems. Oh yeah, and Trump had the VA Mission Act too, along with the increase to the VA. So it's just you can't use these specific policies to show that one person cares and one doesn't, because they had similar policies for veterans and whatnot. And when you bring up the PACT Act, you also have to remember that it had major delays in the claims processing, a backlog of appeals, it had funding challenges, it was widely critiqued.
doing drugs outside police stations, living
I
in
thought he was
high-rise.
going to bring up like the war in Ukraine and Iran and Israel. That would be important to bring up, because there was a lot of mistakes made. I mean, that he cares about the American people. But again, I do think this is a poor prompt.
Even go out of his way, lose his worth to run
Could
for
be for
president.
power, could be for anything, you know.
Great question. And here's what I'd say. I'd say that Donald Trump has billions of dollars, literally speaking. He doesn't care about money. He wants something else. He wants power, right? And being able to force himself into the highest position of ranking power in the world is a big deal. And that's what he wants. He doesn't really care about the American people, or else he would have enacted legislation for the low and middle class, or else he would have not tried to